I'm joined now by Andreas Krieg from the School of Security Studies at King's College London. What's your assessment of this video released by the Israeli military's chief in which he tries to show Hamas as using hospitals as an instrument of war?
Well, I mean, it's a known fact that Hamas is hiding among the civilian population and has also used, dual-use infrastructure, which is civilian infrastructure, for their operations. But we also need to be very, very careful about Israel's use of information. We're in a war over narratives. The IDF has made repeated and has released repeated pieces of mis and disinformation. If we look at that video in particular, we have to exercise a lot of scrutiny. Israel is a party to this conflict. They have a motivation to take a particular stance in this, to make themselves look better than they actually are. They, unfortunately, in this war have shown that veracity is not necessarily one of their main ways of doing it, of presenting information. If you look at the shaft in particular, we don't know if that's a shaft that goes to a tunnel. We don't know if that's a maintenance shaft. Some of the releases of videos last week that were released by the IDF afterwards were shown to be actually just maintenance shafts that were actually not tunnels that were going into anywhere into Hamas infrastructure. So we don't know that. Then the video is doctored, so then in a lot of occasions we've seen cuts made, so we don't know where this tunnel is leading. Apparently we are then underneath, we're shown into a basement that's underneath a hospital. We don't really know where this is. Also, the evidence that's being presented here is very, very dubious. It's certainly not conclusive. We're seeing diapers and we're seeing bottles. That's quite clear that civilians were staying there, but that's true because civilians were hiding in hospitals and had to hide in hospitals for the last couple of weeks during the bombardment. So that's no evidence for anything. Then we've seen a rouster or a calendar on the wall in Arabic where all we see is basically the days of the week in Arabic, and that's being presented as evidence that this is a hideout for Hamas. Again, it makes it very, very dubious, and in many ways undermines the credibility of what the IDF is trying to present here. And it's very important that we keep a clear eye out. We've seen videos being doctored by the IDF. We've seen these kind of staged conversations that allegedly were supposed to show Hamas fighters that were intercepted. It turned out they were scripted. So we have to be very careful in the way that we're looking at that evidence, so to speak. And obviously, yes, we're seeing that some of the arms were basically put there. We don't know if the arms were actually found there or if they were dumped there. So the video in itself has to be kind of dealt with. It has to be scrutinized in the same way that we would scrutinize Russian information or Hamas information.
Scrutinize this next one for me then. The Israeli military has also released a video taken from the air in which it says a Hamas fighter is using a rocket launcher outside Al-Quds hospital.
Yes, I've seen that video as well. I think that is being geolocated. I think that it seems to be the right location and the right time. And it's an active war zone. I don't think it's surprising that Hamas in an active war zone is operating all over the territory and all over the infrastructure. This is obviously a war crime. Hamas is hiding, as I said initially, are hiding among the civilian population, but that still doesn't mean that Israel has been absolved of its its duty to differentiate between civilians and fighters here. So you can't just bomb a hospital just because you're being shot at from that hospital. Unfortunately, that's not how international law works. And we also should bear in mind that these so-called human shields are passive human shields. There's a difference between active and passive human shields. Passive human shields are those people who are not known that they are human shields. They're being abused by Hamas as human shields. And that means that the attacker, in this case, the IDF, has to really exercise a lot of caution when they're going in there. And I think that's what the US president means. It means don't use area effect weapons, don't use artillery, don't use air-dropped ordnance against these targets, but move in with infantry. And even that will be messy because obviously Hamas is operating from among the civilian population.
Lastly, Andreas, can you also just tell me, is it accepted consensus in the intelligence community that Hamas does hide command facilities under civilian infrastructure?
Now, you need to understand that the entire Gaza Strip, not just Gaza City, but the entire Gaza Strip is an infrastructure of hundreds of kilometers of tunnels and bunkers and command centers all over what is essentially a fairly densely populated area. And some of these command structures will be, inevitably under civilian infrastructure. Some of them will be underneath or near hospitals. So that video that was released by the IDF yesterday suggests, though, that that bunker was some 100 meters away or 200 meters away from the hospital. So it's difficult to say that they're actually hiding it underneath the hospital, but certainly close to a hospital. And that's deliberate. Hamas doesn't, that's kind of what an insurgency force would do, to kind of hide themselves among civilians to make sure they can't be struck. So, it still doesn't absolve Israel from the duty to basically differentiate between civilian and combatants and make sure that collateral damage is absolutely minimized. And the IDF has unfortunately not done this, because they've always relied on the one argument of saying Hamas is hiding among the civilians, and the burden of protecting civilians is then being shifted to Hamas, which is not true. The burden of protecting civilians is both on Hamas and the IDF.
Andreas Krieg, security analyst, thank you very much for chiming in on DW News.
Thank you.
Well, Jonas,